Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for Industrial Curtains, How to Identify Applications and Become a Solution Provider. Our webinar will start in a few minutes. We're going to give everybody a couple more minutes just to finish logging in, and we will be with you shortly. Thank you very much. All right, hello. I am Liz Novak, and I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Publications for IAPD. Thank you all for joining today's e-training webinar, Industrial Curtains, How to Identify Applications and Become a Solution Provider, presented by Zach Adams of Gateway Marketing Solutions. During this presentation, you may submit questions into the Questions tab on your webinar toolbar, and we will answer them at the conclusion of the presentation. Following the webinar, you will receive a link to a survey. Once you have completed the survey, there will be a link to download the presentation slides. A recording of today's webinar will also be available for download on the IAPD website. To introduce Zach, I wanted to let you know that Zach Adams is the Gateway Marketing Solutions Seneca Sales Manager. He has worked in the material handling business for more than 10 years, starting as a sales representative with the Right Height Network, in which he regularly assisted customers with their ZoneWorks industrial curtain products. He then transitioned to Gateway Marketing Solutions, in which he began to represent TMI in 2017. His familiarity and success with industrial curtains as a distributor has strengthened his knowledge of the industry and products to a point where now his main objective is to train distribution on how to identify applications and become a solution provider for customers who may be unaware of the benefits of an industrial curtain. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Zach. And Zach, here you go. You should be able to be in control.
All right. Thank you very much. Can you see my screen as is right now? Or
yes.
The slide deck that came. All right. I'm working from a dual screen here, so I want to make sure that I got to everybody that they can see it. So give me a second here, and we'll get this moving. All right. Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the intro on this. This is a really neat opportunity, and I hope today that one of the main takeaways that you guys get to see is that there's a lot of different things that can be used inside the plastics industry. One of the main things that we're going to talk about today is going to be based around the idea that we have a cost-effective solution against standard construction. Just to confirm real quick, the only slide that you guys see currently is just the industrial slide. You can see my mouse circling this, correct?
Hey, Zach, I think we actually have the other.
All right. I just want to make sure I have this right. So can you actually see my presentation slide where it shows the next slide here showing up?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, give me one moment here. I will get this switched around. Apologies for the technical difficulties here. I am having an issue with getting this switched over to the other screen. All right, so we will go ahead and we will just operate from this screen. You guys will be able to see the majority of this. As long as you guys can see the actual documentation, the next slide won't bother you. There's no notes or anything that'll be distracting. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So back to what I was saying with this is the nice thing about this is you guys are going to see a lot of different applications in which in the plastics industry, we have the ability to go in and use a vinyl or composite type product in conjunction with the other items that we've already mentioned to go in and provide curtain walls. And that's really the main thing that you guys are going to be seeing today is a variety of different applications for that. So hopefully by the end of this, you can understand where we can apply this and how exactly they can benefit you, whether you be the end user, whether you have a customer, or you have somebody out there that may have a need for separating of multiple environments. Go ahead and get into this. So on the second slide here, just kind of give you some ideas of what we're looking at as far as industrial curtains go. On the industrial curtain side of this is you've got an application here on the left side in which we have a retractable curtain system. This is for an automotive manufacturing service center where they actually are going in and working on a variety of different parts. The main deal here is that the customer wanted to come through and give themselves a clean area that was contained from other areas. Something that you're going to hear me say pretty repetitively today is actually going to be in reference to separating two different environments. In some cases, it may be more than that, but realistically, we're looking to separate two different environments. So again, on the left side, a retractable curtain, the car pulls in, the car pulls out, you retract it around, completely washed down type materials. Standard vinyls for this are going to be between 18 ounces to 40 ounces, just depending on exactly the durability of what you guys are needing. On the right side of the screen here, you see what looks to be a door. I'll highlight this a little bit in more detail on some slides coming up, but this is a very interesting application because we do a lot of exterior curtains in areas in which maybe the cold winter of the Midwest is affecting you, or especially up there in the Northeast. You're looking for a windbreak, you're looking for a variety of different applications in which you don't want to go through and take the expense of having a general contractor come in and do an actual build out. Or maybe you need it because of the flexibility of the idea that you can take a curtain down and reinstall it at a later date. One of my favorite pictures on this slide here in the bottom right corner is actually an operational curtain. You can see that there is actually a motor that actually operates the curtain up and down. So the nice thing about this is that if you need a section in which can be temporarily movable, or you want something to have entrance and exit from this, and it wants to be more of a hands-off, there's no one telling you out there that we can't do anything involved with automation. So if you can take from this, again, the applications we're going to look at, really want to just expand your mind towards what we can do with industrial curtains. Give you guys just a brief overview here of the construction of this. So generally what you're going to see, and we'll mention a few of these bullet points as we go through, is it's going to be a heat-sealed seam system. So basically what we're doing is we're doing a heat welding all around that curtain. The main thing that you're going to see is that it's going to prevent that curtain from fraying. You don't have exposed edges that are easy to cut. It's not going to cut or damage any other product that may be going through the opening itself. The nice thing about this is, again, we've talked about a variety of the different materials, but we want to talk about the flexibility too as we get into this, so about the installation and how simple it is to attach these curtains to what an existing structure may be. One of the main highlights that we were going to discuss here is a little bit about the NFPA 701, basically stating that the majority of materials that we're using on this are flame retardant. And basically how that situation works is that it is put inside of a testing lab. Inside of that testing lab, it is held up to a flame, and as long as the flame extinguishes within 2 minutes or does not continue to smolder once it hits the testing floor grounds, we generally can be listed as fire retardant. And I do want to highlight the retardant portion of this, is that I'm not coming to you and saying that this necessarily is a fireproof system. We are dealing with vinyl curtains here. So something a little bit further with that. As we go through this, I'll try to highlight some of the different applications we'll actually be talking about. Anything from cold storage separations, where the main objective is to talk about two separate temperatures and how we can, create a more effective energy code for them. And then also we'll talk a little bit about food compliance, and with the CFR 21, how that's replaced some of the USDA compliancy, and uses for applications in washdown. I think one of the neatest things you're going to get a catch from this is as Liz had mentioned with some of my experiences, that I've got some really cool applications out in the industry now where we were able to convince the customer of the overall value of these curtain systems. And you're going to see anything from washdown inside of food facilities to very sensitive materials as to temperature for pharmaceutical applications, and also to sound, and making a safer environment for workers and employees. As we go through this, I want to mention a few things here. I really am going to focus in on the cost effectiveness of this last slide that I'm going to show you inside of this presentation. Actually kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of how the costs are from the vinyl or curtain side of the business compared to conventional constructions and other methods of, again, separating multiple environments. On this slide here, I'm going to have a couple slides here that kind of highlight a little bit about the actual hardware used. And with that being said, it's going to build into this idea of flexibility of the curtain. It's easy to see that a curtain itself is flexible. It's malleable. It's something that you can move, rearrange. Imagine, your drapes at your house, a very similar situation. But then we start to talk a little bit about the idea that we can come in and do different installations of this. And what you'll see here is a variety of different tracks, brackets, and materials. So essentially what we're looking for is how can we actually come in and do the installation in an existing facility, whether it be hanging from the rafters or joist or even a self-standing unit that I'll give you guys some examples of. This all plays very well into this idea of a quote-unquote temporary structure. And when I say this temporary structure is because the idea that as you're talking to your customer, or maybe this is for your facility itself, is that you now have a structure that can be used, taken down, stored, brought back out, used again for a different application. So just kind of expanding your horizons towards that. Further than that, from a flexibility standpoint, on the left side of this drawing here, you can actually see where you see a sliding track. The sliding portion of this is very unique in the idea that now we're coming up with another idea of how we can replace operable partitions. If anybody here has dealt with that before, you know that there's a lot of engineering that goes into that. There's a lot of costs associated with that. You can see a lot of these applications actually replacing these curtains that you'll see inside of gymnasiums, where you're trying to separate multiple environments to have basketball on one side, indoor soccer on the other, but segregate different areas. Again, separating two different environments. The ability to have this on a roller track and have it completely suspended in other applications works out nicely. Again, one of the ones I'll show you for the food application actually will come back to show you how we can separate two manufacturing lines, but also give employees access to go through the areas themselves. I touched briefly on the installation portion of these. The main portion that I want to highlight with you guys here is the idea of a pre-engineered structure. So a really interesting article came out a couple months ago from a general contractor here in the area in which I live. And the whole idea of this was that why is every construction project over budget and way over time? And how do we fix that? And one of the main things that they addressed on that was the idea of a pre-engineered solution. So whether that be modular construction or whether that be something that is pre-made and just shipped out to the factory and installed, it's the idea of how can we speed things up and give somebody a solution in their industry in which they can maintain their budgets, but also maintain time. Because one of the things that we'll discuss as we talk about the manufacturing environment is the idea that time is essentially money. And I know everybody's heard that proverbial term before, but the neat thing about it is that if you think about downtime and that being how that affects the output, giving a customer an extra day, an extra week, an extra month to actually have manufacturing processes start, and they can actually start generating a cash flow because they didn't have to go through the standard permitting process of doing standard construction. You now can see how a curtain that's installed in a very quick amount of time but separates two environments can lend itself to that. So the main thing you see on this slide here are just different types of track configurations in which we can install two existing walls or roofs above or pre-existing structures or columns. Again, just all playing into that idea of flexibility. The first type of curtain that we're going to talk about today here inside of our slide is specialty curtains. And on this specialty curtain, one of the main features that I wanted to highlight was the idea of an exterior curtain. So I kind of gave you guys a little bit of an idea about that before, but I want to talk a little bit more about the construction of this. Generally, what you'll see is that you have two portions of 18-ounce vinyl on both sides of some sort of insulation, whether that just be foam or that could be some sort of batting material, something just to give you an essential windbreak. But one of the neat things about this is that you see centered on the top picture in the middle of this is there's actually a wind baffle associated with this. The idea of this wind baffle is to allow some air pressure to feed through that door, so it essentially doesn't create a sail and blow this product completely out. The bottom picture highlights a bungee cord. The bungee cord is effective to play into that same arena. If there is a high wind, like you see a lot of times here in the Midwest where I'm located, that wind can essentially put a lot of pressure on even sectional doors. But in this application, we're just looking for a temporary separation between the exterior and the interior. The interior and the exterior. With that being said, the bungee cord allows some flexibility in being pushed back and forth. The next thing that we'll talk about is the idea of lower maintenance cost. If in effect you're coming in and you put some sort of a wall or a temporary structure here, and let's say that a truck or a forklift impacts this, now you're looking at not only downtime, you're looking at less than ideal environmental issues inside the facility, but you're also looking at potential damages and maintenance costs. In this instance, we're offering something, again, you hear me use this word a lot, that's very flexible, something that can be used over and over again and have a variety of different ways in which it does work. So you look for the applications in this, you see down the perfect four, pole barns, pavilions, access openings, and loading docks. Just again, something to kind of give you guys a cost alternative to what the standard convention is out in the industry. Moving on to the next slide, this is one that's near and dear to my heart. Go through the application a little bit here. We have a lot of different curtains that can be utilized for sound enclosures. So you may be in the middle of a facility and there's a loud material grinder, and the overall noise output that is coming from said material grinder is creating health concerns, and the idea that the decibel rating is too high. Generally speaking, if anything is more than 82 decibels within a working environment, the employees are meant to use earplugs. In some applications, that's fine, but as you well know, maintaining employees and ensuring that they are doing what's best for their health is not always the easiest thing to do. So in an application like this, we can come in and offer anywhere between 12 to 20 different decibel ratings, depending on the types of material is used. So as far as the actual materials themselves are, again, we're going back to the 18 to 22 ounce vinyl, 2 layers of that with some sort of insulation on the inside, whether it be some type of a placard board, such as rubber, or in some instances you have a non-loaded fiber or vinyl placard board that actually is looking to either absorb or deflect sound. In the instance here you see in the top right, we've got an application in which a customer had that noisy material grinder, and it sat right smack dab in the middle of the plant. What we were able to identify is that they at first came back and said, hey, look, we're going to have a general contractor coming here. They're going to build this curtain, or they're going to build this room for us and give us some sort of an input in which we can still feed the materials but have access to it later. The unfortunate thing about that was that that's rigid construction. So with the rigid construction portion of this, they were going to have to build this room out to be significantly larger so that maintenance folk could come in there and work around this and not have to be concerned with where they're at with the curtains. Well, with standard curtain construction on this, as you guys can see, there are 4-foot panels. The 4-foot panels are held together by just some sort of industrial style Velcro. That Velcro has the ability to be released. The panels can be taken completely down. So again, if the machine needs to be moved, reused, doing considerable maintenance or in addition to, it's relatively easy to do that as opposed to coming in and knocking down a general construction wall. So back to this application, we were able to come in and just do a simple 10 by 10 enclosure that we took and suspended completely from the roof above. So again, the big advantage there is that we no longer need to worry about having some sort of structural relief. We're using what the customer is already providing us, and that curtain is able to drape down from that. In this specific application, the material grinder was completely surrounded. They did a case study on it, and afterwards they had 26 decibel reduction within the facility. They took it from something that was almost 100 decibels down well below the 82 decibel line. The employees were able to take the earplugs out, and from a little bit of a comedic standpoint, they could hear each other without having to scream at each other. So again, you take a little bit of value in that, and creature comfort is one of those things that certainly play well into why industrial curtains are very valuable. On the bottom side here, I just want to show you the picture of a freestanding unit. It's where I explained above, the majority of these curtains that you will see in today's application are going to be hung from existing structures. In this specific situation, we're actually looking to take a curtain and create a box around something. So what we can actually provide, and what you'll see a lot in the industry, is that there are modular systems out there where you can erect an actual structure, a 4-wall structure, to put panels all the way around the outside of that. Again, versatility, flexibility of what we can do with systems such as this. Continuing through our specialty curtain types. In this application, we're going to talk a little bit about curtain types from the perspective of temperature control. Again, we've mentioned before that you may use this in manufacturing to separate 2 environments, whether it just be manufacturing from distribution and you want to prevent dust from coming in towards your finished goods. Sometimes, like you've seen in the past slides, it may be sound, it could be wind. But one of the probably most frequently used items that customers are looking for, really when it comes to cost savings, is how do I separate 2 different temperature zones? And what that may mean is, let's use this as an example, a customer may have a 50,000 square foot warehouse, and there's a certain portion of the product itself that needs to be held to a certain temperature. But the rest of the building and the rest of the product may not necessarily need that, and the cost associated with coming in and completely retrofitting their HVAC system to maintain said temperature for the entire area was way too expensive and could cause the business to have to make a serious decision on whether or not to maintain certain products. The application that you guys see here, it was a pharmaceutical company, or an application, very similar to what you see here. We had a pharmaceutical company that had a certain chemical that needed to be held at a certain temperature degrees. Well, in the summertime, it was very easy for that warehouse to get well over 85 degrees. And they had to maintain, I think it was 78 degrees constantly. And if it exceeded that for even 1 hour, this multi-million-dollar chemical would have to be thrown out. As you can imagine, there was a lot of pressure behind creating a perfect system for this. Leading back to the flexibility of this, and what you actually see in this picture too, is that because it's a curtain and it is suspended from the existing ceiling, we actually were able to run this in between existing racking systems. They did not have to come back in and redo any of their racking. They were able to leave everything exactly as is, come in, use an insulated curtain in between the two different areas, isolate this with just one HVAC unit to supply just the area of sensitive temperature product, and leave the rest of it completely open. Now what we've done is help somebody completely isolate something as opposed to going and overhauling an entire system that's not needed. So when it really comes to counting costs, this makes a lot of sense. On the benefit side of this is you're typically looking for anywhere between up to almost 30 degrees of temperature separation. I know that I have 27 here. And really the main difference between that is that what materials are we using in conjunction with our curtains? What are we actually insulating them with? Is it single layer, double layer, triple layers of different types of insulation that can come back in and actually give you an R value up to 7, which is pretty significant when it comes to, again, a temporary structure. So with this being said too, these materials generally, and you'll even see on the next slide here where we talk a little bit about the FDA and such, is actually the idea that you can come in and have washdown associated with this too. So just to give you that brief explanation, we talked about the flexibility with this, but also to know access control. And when I get into the questions a little bit later of what to ask when inside these facilities, hopefully it'll kind of give you a bigger idea of how you can utilize this. Very quickly here on slide number 10, we're taking a little bit about the material options on this. One of the main things I want to talk about, I actually had a really interesting letter that was sent to me that I wanted to kind of give everybody an idea on. If you work in or in conjunction with anything in the food industry, as you can imagine, between the USDA and FDA, there's a lot of compliance issues out there. There's a lot of need for specialty materials to be used because obviously if there's going to be either incidental food contact or the potential for bacteria or other contaminants to grow within the facility, it's going to be a very costly effect for a varying lot of companies. With that being said, an interesting letter came to us a while back for anybody that's interested in the compliance of this, is that the USDA actually used to do testing on all materials. You actually used to be able to get a certification from the USDA. And in this certification, they'd say, yes, these materials are compliant with us, and they would take on some sort of a liability stating that this works out well. Well, in the world of litigation that we work in now, the vast majority of you probably understand that that was a little bit of a liability standpoint to them. They wanted to remove themselves from that. And USDA discontinued this back in 1997, where they would actually give the certification. So in place of this, we had the CFR 21. And this is CFR 21 is the governing body that now comes in and gives a compliancy rating. They worked in conjunction with the USDA to come up with a form of how these materials could be put within the food facilities for washdown applications. And they came up with something that said it was compliant. Once again, just by simply changing rated to compliant, they took the liability away from this, but still gave something in which the USDA inspectors can come in and do a judging on the materials based upon what materials they're using for the separations of the environments themselves. Other than that, we've already talked a little bit about the NFPA. We'll get in a little bit here now on some of these food type materials, but just want to give you guys some of the varying ideas with that. The 18-ounce PVC coated polyester comes in a variety of different colors, and the cool thing about that is that it can be extremely customized towards what your customer is specifically looking for. A product line that TMI represents, being the clean screen, will be a little bit of a focus on this slide here. With this slide, what I kind of want to show you guys is how exactly that the food industry needs to be handled and kind of what that works. The very first thing that I want to mention is that this is a USDA grade, once again, grade or compliant, 0.04-inch thick material. But the nice thing about it too is that we also can go with very low temperatures. So the temperature rating on this is typically anywhere between -20 degrees up to 110 degrees constant temperature. So again, you can think about the different ideas from boiling and cooking rooms all the way down to freezer applications. The main thing here is that we do have the ability to actually do a washdown. And in the next slide, I actually will show you a diagram of what the track system looks like. It does kind of add some additional validity to how do we actually keep an area clean and again, prevent anything from harboring. All the materials within this do apply to the CFR Title 21 on this. And again, any sort of materials outside of that is generally going to be some sort of a stainless steel. You do see this on a track, and in the application which I show you next will be the same way. But obviously, if we needed to do a quote-unquote non-temporary portion of this, hang it directly from the ceiling and leave it stationary, very easy to do as well. And here's an application in which was one of the top food manufacturers here in the United States. Called us up with an initial lead, and they had an inquiry. They were doing an expansion to their facility. Inside of this facility, they could not decide of how they actually wanted to lay out their lines. So they had multiple lines within this facility in which there was some sort of food processing going on. And the real issues that came into play here were, we can't figure out our exact spacing on this, but we know that we need to do some sort of separation. The architect and the general contractor were having a hard time because they needed to know where exactly they needed to place their structural for the building itself. When they started to do some research, they found out that there were some of these CFR 21 availabilities for more temporary structures, and they stumbled across TMI. So in this application specifically, what they looked to do was, after the lines were installed, or right before a couple of them even were finalized, we came in and we actually separated all the different lines with a retractable system. So again, I've mentioned a little bit about the flexibility of this. The neat thing with this one is that these curtain systems could be pulled completely out of the way. And then during the manufacturing process, if maintenance needed to be done, they could go through and section off each and every quadrant of that and not affect any manufacturing process of the remainder of the plant. So again, we're looking at cost savings, but also money generation. So just take a moment just to take a peek at that. While you're looking at those two photos of this food facility, in the bottom right corner, you'll see that there's a diagram of the track system itself. The standard track systems that you guys saw earlier had the nylon rollers actually rolling inside the track. But in order to do that, it had to have a lip on both sides. That lip actually would be a potential harboring point. Whether it even be out of stainless or galvanized and can be washed down, that would be something that somebody would have to get up in there and clean. So when you take a look at this track, the flange hangs directly down from the roof, or again, however you need to mount that. It could be wall mounted. It is stainless steel, but then there's a tube. The rollers itself actually roll on top of that tube. Again, with no flat surfaces, you're not going to have any harboring issues. And with the idea that the actual track and roller system is completely exposed, there's no issues with doing any wash down protocol with that whatsoever. So for my final two slides here that we're going to discuss today, I'm going to walk through a little bit about how to properly complete a site survey and some of the different applications. I'll highlight each of these pictures to give you an idea of how it applies directly to that site survey. Again, hopefully the idea here is that you get a true feeling for what you can do with these. And then the next slide that we'll talk about here is some very general rough per square foot prices, and just to once again kind of add that validity to how this is a cost savings for you. So the very first thing that I'm looking at when I'm walking inside a facility and I'm training distribution or trying to get in front of somebody to understand exactly what they're looking to do to, once again, separate environments, is understand really what the customer's expectation of this is. If the customer wants you to come in and say, hey, look, we're going to be able to separate 2,000 degrees of temperature difference, or we want this thing to essentially be a structural rigid platform, as we well know with these curtain systems, it can't be done. But if we know that the customer is looking simply to separate an area in which one side needs to be clean and the other side not so much, or it's a temperature difference, it usually works out pretty well. So with that being said, understanding that expectation leads you into these next questions. The very first one you're really going to want to identify outside of the expectation is, what is the actual application? In this presentation today, we've gone through a variety of different slides and shown you some different materials that can be used and some different styles of curtains that can be utilized to create a solution, but it's understanding exactly what we're looking at there. Again, in the top right, we talked about the flexible curtains that are insulated, the idea of separating temperature, wash down. Down below, you're looking for the ability to separate manufacturing processes from not, but with an operable partition. So that's obviously a large one. The one that kind of goes without saying, especially if you're looking to get some kind of quotation from somebody, is that what are our overall dimensions on this? Going through the facility and actually understanding where we can place this. Looking up is one of the biggest things you could ever be suggested, is actually looking up and understand what are we actually attaching to. So in this application here, you can see I've moved down to question number 4, is that how are we supporting this? Is it being supported from the ceiling itself? Are we creating some sort of a self-standing structure? Are we running parallel with the joist? And just kind of going through all that. But once again, with the application in the top right, we discussed the ability to be able to go in between Racking systems. Not so much the racking system in general that everybody needs to be aware of, but the idea that the curtain may be no wider than 3 inches thick can give you some pretty tight applications in which you can apply this, and once again, not have to go through the general construction portion of that. So obviously a big deal there. We mentioned the different styles of tracking that's associated with this, so we can get flexible if you need to go all the way to the deck because you are separating temperature environments, which you'll see here in the second picture down on the right. The ability to maintain heat or cold on one side, you obviously need to have a very tight seal. As you can see on the version of the clean screen or the retractable curtain there with the stainless steel on the top picture on the left, it was just up to a certain level that needed to be dealt with overspray. So there's no sense in spending any additional money to take that all the way up to the deck. Obstructions is a big deal, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about when I start getting involved with general contractors and architects about the flexibility of the situation, is the idea that if you guys have penetrations that need to go through, whether that be piping or pneumatics or electrical or conduit, in the applications you see on the middle right picture there, is having your actual struts or your structure will go through the building itself, or the wall itself, excuse me. So the nice thing about a curtain itself is you can actually cut it. You can cut to mold directly around that. There's no reason to build up to it, frame out around it, have any sort of special work around that. You can just cut it, and then using a vinyl patch tape actually come back in and do a chemical weld directly to that, giving you that tight seal. And then lastly, in the picture on the bottom side we show here is what type of access is needed. This is generally overlooked in most applications. Customers really aren't thinking about this. They know they need to get in there, but their main concern is, how am I going to separate these two environments? We have the ability to do roll-up doors. We have man doors, strip doors. I mean, you name it, we have the ability to put some sort of activation in there. All too often, the most important thing that is missed, and all too often, the most important thing that is needed, is the type of access with this. So always be aware of what type of access is needed and what door can potentially service that the best. And for my last slide, kind of the summation here, so everybody can kind of put some dollar numbers to this. I do want to drop a big caveat on this. This is based upon some conversations I've had with a lot of the different trades that I deal with on a frequent basis. Some of this from my own experience itself. It's obviously could vary from place to place. So this is not set in stone, and my reference is really just more of a conversational piece here. But just to give you guys some ideas of things that I've looked up. When it comes to, again, separating these environments, look at this from a cost of per square foot. And that means when you're looking at a wall itself, it's a 4x4 wall. You're looking at 16 square feet. So when you look at this, then I want everybody to kind of picture it from that standpoint. On the insulated curtain side of this, with some hardware included, you're looking at roughly $5 a square foot. So you do the math on that. You can figure out pretty quickly about the cost associated for doing a wall that is 20 by 20, right? Down from that, again, maybe it's not necessarily so much for temperature control, but it's just that you want to separate the environments between two different environments completely. With dust control, you're looking at roughly only $3 a square foot to do that, again, including hardware. So it's kind of neat to see how these things piece together and how inexpensive this can go. So if you're looking for some contrast on that with a lot of different ways that these things are done, for the food industry, the insulated metal panel wall, very easy to put together. A tongue and groove system typically attaches to the ceiling just like ours would, not necessarily load bearing, but some structural steel may be tossed in there to support it completely. It is a heavier material, so therefore it can't just be draped. It needs to actually have some sort of lateral support. And based upon some of the conversations I've had, you're generally looking at roughly around $11 a square foot on that. Take that a step further, you have modular construction out there now, which essentially is a panel and post type connection, which you can build buildings, put roofs on it, and run structural, whatever you need to do. You're looking at almost $20 a square foot there. And the big one, and the one that we're facing more frequently than any, and the conversation that, again, as somebody that's looking to either save money and implement this in their own system or go out and sell this, is the idea of conventional stick construction. If you ever hear anybody say that they need that wall temporarily, this is the moment in which your ears should really perk up. If you can come in and say, look, I can save you well over half the cost per square foot on this, it's not going to be hard to at least get the opportunity to go in and be able to set that up as a bid. So you're looking at general stick construction at roughly $15 a square foot based upon, again, some of the things that I've seen. So the big wrap up of that and how all of this kind of plays into what we're looking at with the curtain systems. Number one, the pricing has really been what I've identified here too, but number two, really the flexibility. The idea that you can come in with a temporary structure and provide something that whether they use it for a month or for 10 years, that is always going to be there and be able to be reused in some or some way. And then after that, you want to talk about, once again, costs associated with install time. Whether it just be simply hanging track or running angle along the bottom side joist, we can do this much quicker than laying studs, putting insulation on both sides, and going through that whole process. So that really is the main thing that I wanted to address today, and hopefully everybody kind of took away from this that there is real applications out there, and that I think that it could be used so much more than what it is in today's industry. Thank you all for your time. Are there any questions?
Zach, yes, there are questions. And so I am going to share the questions that have already been asked. And as Zach is answering them, if you do have further questions, please add them to the chat window on your webinar screen. So the first question we have is, have you seen PTFE and or silicone-coated fiberglass for any of your applications?
And what was the first one? I'm sorry?
PTFE?
Not entirely for sure on that. I have seen some of the coated products out there. It just, again, depends on the application. Where I've seen that is in some clean room applications, but it just really depends on what we're actually talking about, the coating. If you had a specific one, I probably could get some additional information for you on that, but occasionally that is utilized, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so the next question is, how do the various materials perform under cold conditions, like in a freezer application?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. And so it's really interesting. It just depends on what we're looking for. So the majority of our materials, anywhere from a 10 ounce all the way up to a 40 ounce, is going to be rated at least -20 degrees. But even past that, we actually have the ability to go in and see, what the brittle rating, or when the actual curtain itself would crack. The majority of these curtains with that are going to be anywhere between -30 to -50 degrees. So as far as even blast freezer goes, we certainly do have some opportunity to utilize these materials.
Great. So a follow-up to that question is, are there issues over time with the plastic cracking due to continued impact with fork trucks?
Absolutely. You can't deny that. I mean, this is a flexible wall structure, so yes. I mean, if forklifts hit this at some sort of repetitive rate in a very low temperature application, it's possible, but it really, again, is all going to be dependent on that brittleness temperature. So, for example, on our the FlexTherm, insulated curtain we discussed today, the brittle temperatureness on this was -50 degrees. So that's when it's cracking on its own. But the operating temperature is -30 degrees. So if you're operating anywhere near that -30 degrees, it's possible that it's going to wear down quicker over time. It really just depends on where you are in that spectrum of temperature.
Okay. All righty. Do you offer an anti-static ESD curtain for possible semiconductor applications?
There are availabilities for that in the industry, absolutely, yes. And we do have access to that. It really just depends on what you're looking for. If it is for some type of a curtain, we do have different ESD capable curtains and materials on that. The one thing that we always mention on that too is just to be aware of on the materials, the flexible side of that too, is that product quote unquote blooms, and I would suggest that you look into that. It's very interesting, is that over time it actually will create almost a greasy or filmy type surface structure to that can cloud the vision. But the main reason is that blooming that this plastic does actually allows or prevents the electrostatic to ever being able to attach to the material itself.
Great. Alrighty. So one more. In your sound abatement applications, have you seen mass-loaded vinyl used?
Yes. Yes, we have.
All right.
And actually, in one of the applications that we have, if you saw the self-standing structure, the gray structure that I had pictured in there, we actually do use a loaded vinyl for that type of a backing.
Great. Okay, so those are the questions that have come in. Thank you all who have participated, and this concludes our presentation. As a reminder, you will receive a survey about today's webinar. Once you complete the survey, there will be a link to download the presentation slides. A recording of today's webinar will be available on the IAPD website on the webinar page. Thank you all for joining us, and Thank you very much, Zach, for your presentation and your time today. This has been great.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you guys for the opportunity.
Great. Have a great day, everyone.